Ethan Carter has always believed that his suburban homestead in Maple Grove Estates was his sanctuary, a peaceful retreat carefully cultivated over decades of hard work and personal passion. A decorated military veteran turned dedicated city official, Ethan now pours his heart into his small, family-run vineyard, where he grows heirloom grapes prized for their flavor and character. Every vine is lovingly tended, each cluster of grapes a testament to a life built on tradition and self-reliance. For Ethan, the vineyard is not just a source of income. It's a legacy, a slice of freedom that he shares with neighbors during impromptu tastings and seasonal festivals. But in a neighborhood governed by strict, often arbitrary rules, not everyone appreciated Ethan's unorthodox lifestyle. At the helm of the Maple Grove Estates Homeowners Association, HOA, stands Kerren, a self-appointed enforcer of conformity. With her perfectly pressed blouses, a clipboard always at hand, and a reputation for nitpicking even the smallest transgressions, Kerren has made it her mission to police every aspect of community life. To her, even something as natural and personal as Ethan's grape harvest must fall in line with her meticulously defined standards. One bright autumn morning, as Ethan walked among his ripening vines and inspected the latest batch of grapes destined for his summer harvest, he noticed something amiss. Clusters of his prized fruit were missing, and a bitter taste of betrayal set in. Moments later, he found Kerren striding up the gravel path to his vineyard. With a smug, self-assured air, she confronted him. "Mr. Carter, it has come to my attention that your unsecured grape harvest is causing a disturbance in our community's aesthetic standards. Unauthorized removal of produce is strictly forbidden by HOA regulations." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Kerren, these grapes are part of my livelihood. I share them with my neighbors and use them to celebrate our local traditions. I've never asked for permission because I own this land and these grapes." But Kerren was unyielding. "Rules are rules," she snapped. "Your negligence sets a dangerous precedent. Consider this your first and final warning. If you don't secure your grapes properly, you'll face fines and further enforcement actions." A small crowd of curious onlookers gathered behind a row of hedges as Kerren's high-heeled steps receded. In that charged moment, Ethan realized this was more than a dispute over stolen fruit. It was the opening salvo in a full-blown campaign of arbitrary control. His cherished vineyard, a symbol of independence and tradition, was now under siege by an HOA more intent on imposing conformity than nurturing community spirit. Determined not to be bullied out of what he loved, Ethan silently vowed to fight back, and perhaps even serve up a spicy surprise of his own. The very next morning, Ethan's routine was disrupted by an unexpected delivery. Taped to his weathered mailbox was a crisp envelope bearing the official seal of the Maple Grove Estates HOA. Inside, a fine of $750 was detailed for violating community-produced security protocols. The legalese was dense and intimidating, a tool designed to force compliance rather than foster understanding. Outside, Kerren stood with arms crossed, her expression as smug as ever. "Remember, Mr. Carter," she said coolly, "the rules are applied equally to every homeowner in our community. Your failure to secure your grapes not only disrupts our communal order, it undermines our entire aesthetic." Refusing to be intimidated, Ethan immediately headed to the local zoning office. With copies of his property deed, records of his long-standing harvest practices, and letters from satisfied neighbors, he argued that his vineyard was operated within all legal guidelines. A sympathetic official confirmed that no ordinance forbade him from sharing his harvest freely, although the officer did warn him that the HOA was known for twisting regulations to suit its own agenda. Back at his vineyard, Ethan found that the harassment was only beginning. Early the next morning, unannounced inspectors arrived, clipboards in hand, measuring his fields, questioning his storage methods, and scrutinizing his security measures. Each visit felt invasive, an unwarranted intrusion into the sanctity of his home and livelihood. The inspector's presence, timed precisely after Kerren's meetings, made it clear that every possible string was being pulled to enforce her arbitrary demands. That evening, at an emergency HOA meeting held in the community center, Kerren took the stage with a stack of official notices and a steely glare. Effective immediately, she announced with unwavering authority. Any homeowner found in violation of our community's standards will face not only additional fines, but potential legal action. Her words echoed ominously through the room, leaving many residents visibly anxious. Ethan sat quietly among the crowd, his mind racing with indignation. This wasn't simply about grapes, it was about control. The fine and the relentless inspections were a calculated attempt to subdue his independence. That night, as he reviewed every document and noted every intrusive visit, Ethan resolved that he would not stand idly by. He would document every violation, every act of overreach, and prepare to challenge the system head-on. Over the next several days, the tactics of the HOA grew increasingly aggressive. Kerren's initial fine was only the beginning. Neighbors began sharing whispers about fines for seemingly trivial infractions. A decorative garden gnome placed slightly askew, an unapproved shade of fence paint, and the air was thick with tension. It soon emerged that Kerren was not only targeting Ethan's vineyard. Her reach extended to anyone daring to express individuality. Determined to understand the full scope of the abuse, Ethan installed discreet cameras around his property. Night after night, he reviewed the footage. He observed inspectors arriving in pairs immediately after HOA meetings, their questions growing ever more invasive. At times, shadowy figures appeared in the background, individuals in plain clothes who seemed to be monitoring his every move. It became clear that Kerren was pulling every trick in the book to enforce her tyrannical vision. Late one evening, as Ethan compiled what he dubbed the Vineyard Vigil files, he unearthed a pattern that chilled him. A disillusioned board member, speaking in hushed tones over a late-night phone call, revealed that fines often mysteriously disappeared when homeowners made large donations to the HOA fund. It's not about keeping order, the board member confided. It's about consolidating power and revenue. Ethan's blood ran cold. This wasn't a case of misplaced rules. It was systematic corruption. With every piece of evidence added to his growing binder of grievances, Ethan's resolve hardened. He realized that Kerren's campaign against him was just a small part of a much larger agenda to enforce uniformity through fear and financial extortion. The Vineyard Vigil files were not merely records of harassment. They were the ammunition he would use to expose the corruption festering within the HOA. Armed with proof and the support of a few sympathetic neighbors, Ethan began to plan a counterattack that would force the community to confront the abusive practices head-on. The stakes were high. Not only was his vineyard under threat, but so was the right of every homeowner in Maple Grove Estates to live freely without arbitrary interference. One cool morning, Ethan awoke to a scene of chaos on his property. Heavy machinery had been parked at the edge of his vineyard, and sections of his cornfield, adjacent to his grapevines, had been cleared and reseeded with bland, approved crops. Kerren claimed it was for community safety and to prevent further violations. But Ethan knew it was a thinly veiled attempt to reshape his land to fit an imposed, uniform vision. Enraged by this blatant intrusion, Ethan gathered every scrap of evidence from his Vineyard Vigil files and prepared to take his fight public. At the next HOA meeting, held in the overly pristine community center, he strode to the podium with quiet determination. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "what you're about to see is undeniable evidence of abuse of power that not only infringes on my property rights, but undermines the very essence of our community." Ethan projected video clips showing unannounced inspections, the invasive machinery altering his fields, and even off-the-record conversations among board members hinting at financial improprieties. The room fell into a heavy silence as each piece of evidence was revealed. Homeowners began sharing their own experiences of unwarranted fines and intrusive inspections, and the atmosphere quickly shifted from cautious deference to simmering rebellion. Kerren, seated at the front with a look of mounting fury, attempted to interject. "These measures are for the benefit of all residents." But her voice was drowned out by the collective outcry. "This isn't about one vineyard or one cornfield," Ethan continued. "It's about our right to live on our own terms. We deserve transparency, respect, and freedom from arbitrary control." As the meeting reached its climax, the assembled residents voiced their support for Ethan's stand. The seeds of dissent that had been growing in whispered conversations now erupted into a united front. Kerren's authority was visibly shaken as the community demanded accountability and a return to genuine neighborly values. In that moment, Ethan knew that the battle was far from over, but the tide was beginning to turn. His bold public confrontation had not only exposed the corruption within the HOA, but had ignited a spark of rebellion that would soon spread throughout Maple Grove Estates. Cornered by a united community and mounting evidence, Kerren resorted to a final, desperate gambit. Late one humid evening, determined to reassert her authority, she decided to call the police. Kerren phoned 911, falsely claiming that Ethan's unauthorized agricultural activities, specifically his use of his land for growing and harvesting grapes, constituted a public disturbance that threatened the community's order. It was a blatant fabrication designed to intimidate and shift the narrative in her favor. Within minutes, uniformed officers arrived at Ethan's property. Standing calmly by his vineyard, Ethan greeted them and, with measured authority, presented his city official badge. "There's no disturbance here," he explained. "This is my private property, and I conduct my agricultural activities within the full bounds of the law." The officers, recognizing the absurdity of the complaint, left after issuing a stern warning to Kerren about misusing emergency services. Not one to accept defeat easily, Kerren escalated her covert efforts further by hiring a private investigator to dig up any dirt on Ethan, anything that could be used to justify further punitive measures. However, thanks to Ethan's vigilant installation of security cameras throughout his property, the PI's every furtive move was captured on film. The footage clearly showed the investigator trespassing and skulking near the grapevines, behavior that was entirely unauthorized. At the next HOA meeting, a session Kerren had banked on to regain control, Ethan unveiled the incriminating evidence. He projected the security footage onto a large screen for all the residents to see. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as the evidence of Kerren's desperate tactics was laid bare. Kerren's face flushed with humiliation and anger as her final attempt to enforce arbitrary power crumbled before the eyes of her neighbors. But Ethan wasn't finished yet. Drawing on his deep well of creativity and resolve, he revealed his secret countermeasure. Over the course of several nights, he had carefully switched out his vulnerable grape harvest with batches of super spicy Pepper X popcorn, a concoction so fiery that anyone who sampled it would be in for an explosive surprise. His plan was simple yet brilliantly poetic. If Kerren was so intent on stealing his grapes, she'd soon discover that her pilfered treats were now laced with a heat that would leave her reeling. The combined shock of the damning footage and the spicy surprise sealed Kerren's fate. The assembled homeowners roared with approval, and it was clear that her days of unchecked authority were numbered. In the wake of the explosive revelations at the HOA meeting, Maple Grove Estates was transformed. The community, long subdued by arbitrary fines and invasive inspections, now buzzed with a united spirit of resistance. At an emergency meeting convened by a coalition of outraged residents, the atmosphere was electric with determination. With the damning evidence of unauthorized trespassing, invasive alterations to private property, and Kerren's desperate maneuvers laid out in plain sight, the homeowners voted overwhelmingly to remove Kerren from the HOA board. The decision sent shockwaves through the community. Within days, local authorities launched a comprehensive investigation into the HOA's practices, exposing a pattern of arbitrary fines, financial mismanagement, and blatant abuse of power. The rigid, oppressive structure that Kerren had so zealously defended began to crumble under the weight of undeniable evidence and the collective outcry of the residents. For Kerren, the consequences were swift and severe. Her personal assets, once flaunted as symbols of her authority, came under intense scrutiny. Financial irregularities and unethical practices were exposed, and her once impeccable home was swiftly listed for sale. The enforcer of draconian rules had become a cautionary tale of unchecked entitlement and abuse of power. Ethan, observing the collapse of Kerren's regime from the sanctuary of his now respected vineyard and cornfield, felt an overwhelming sense of vindication. His battle to protect his grapes, and later, to serve a fiery dose of poetic justice with super spicy Pepper X popcorn, had sparked a movement that reclaimed the rights of every homeowner in Maple Grove Estates. Neighbors, emboldened by their newfound unity, began sharing their own stories of past grievances and envisioning a future free from arbitrary control. As the old HOA structure disintegrated, new policies emerged, ones built on transparency, accountability, and genuine respect for individual freedoms. Ethan's innovative counterattack, a symbol of creative resistance, stood as a testament to the community's triumph over tyranny. With a quiet smile and a cup of coffee in hand, he watched as the remnants of Kerren's oppressive reign faded into the past. With the community's uprising in full swing and the corrupt practices of the old HOA exposed beyond doubt, local authorities had no choice but to act decisively. Investigations into the invasive inspections, arbitrary fines, and other abuses of power revealed that the rules being enforced were nothing more than a facade for personal gain. The city imposed steep fines on the HOA for violating homeowners' rights, and a class action lawsuit was swiftly filed on behalf of the aggrieved residents. At a press conference held in the newly reformed community center, Ethan stood before a crowd of reporters and relieved neighbors. "Today, we've proven that no one is above the law," he stated firmly. "Our community will no longer be held hostage by arbitrary rules and unchecked power." This legal victory marks the beginning of a new era for Maple Grove Estates. As court dates were set and legal documents piled up, individual board members began facing personal legal consequences for their roles in the oppression. Even Kerren's longtime legal advisor came under investigation for facilitating the HOA's unethical practices. The collapse of the old system was not only symbolic, it was a comprehensive legal reckoning that sent a clear message to communities everywhere. Transparency and fairness must prevail. For Ethan, this legal triumph was the final power move, a vindication of his long-fought battle against tyranny. The class action lawsuit not only promised financial restitution for the wronged homeowners, but also paved the way for a complete overhaul of community governance. Maple Grove Estates was now poised to enter a future defined by respect, collaboration, and true neighborly spirit. As the legal and public consequences mounted, Kerren's personal life began to unravel in spectacular fashion. Once the iron-fisted enforcer of Maple Grove Estates' arbitrary rules, she soon found herself isolated, ridiculed, and financially ruined. The shocking spectacle of her repeatedly stealing Ethan's grapes, and the subsequent reveal that her pilfered loot had been replaced with super spicy Pepper X popcorn, turned her once formidable reputation into a source of endless mockery. Within weeks, her prized sedan was repossessed amid mounting debts, and rumors of personal turmoil spread like wildfire. Whispers of a crumbling marriage and the collapse of her once impeccable authority became common conversation among residents. The very system she had championed to enforce conformity now turned its back on her, leaving her a cautionary tale of unchecked entitlement. In a final bitter twist, Kerren attempted to salvage her reputation by seeking employment in the property management field. Instead, she was offered an entry-level position as an assistant property manager for another HOA, a public admission of her dramatic fall from grace. At a local networking event, a former neighbor couldn't help but quip, "I hope you enjoy following the rules now, Kerren." The remark, laced with both humor and triumph, encapsulated her complete and public collapse. Ethan, watching these developments from the peaceful confines of his reclaimed property, felt a deep sense of poetic justice. His struggle had never been solely about protecting his grapes. It was about defending the fundamental right to live freely, without interference from arbitrary power. Kerren's humiliating downfall, documented in every grain of evidence and echoed in the laughter of her former subjects, served as a powerful reminder that unchecked entitlement ultimately crumbles under the weight of truth and community unity. In the months following Kerren's dramatic downfall, Maple Grove Estates blossomed into a community reborn. The dark days of arbitrary fines, invasive inspections, and overbearing rules gave way to an atmosphere of creativity, collaboration, and genuine respect for individual freedoms. Neighbors now gathered in open-air celebrations, sharing stories, laughter, and the simple joys of life on their own terms. Ethan, whose once sacred vineyard had been the target of relentless theft, and who had cleverly retaliated by switching his grapes with super spicy Pepper X popcorn, now enjoyed his harvest in peace. At a spirited neighborhood block party, celebrating their reclaimed rights, a jovial resident presented him with a handmade HOA violation notice for excessive spicy surprises. The crowd erupted in laughter as Ethan held the sign high and remarked with a wry smile, "They really tried." As twilight settled over Maple Grove Estates and the soft glow of the evening bathed the land, the memory of oppression faded into a distant echo. The community had reclaimed not only its rights, but its spirit, a spirit that celebrated individuality, nurtured creativity, and defied conformity at every turn. In that final, golden moment of celebration, as neighbors toasted their victory and laughter filled the warm air, the screen of a once oppressive era faded to black, a final mic drop that signaled the ultimate triumph of a united community over entitlement.